All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Kim, Children and Young Adult Consultant. Thank you for joining us for understanding and connecting with your teen patrons. I am going to quickly turn this over. Y'all are not here to hear from me today, to Jennifer Laceman, and we're going to get this presentation started. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Hi, everyone. I am Jen Laceman. I am the head of teen services for Fairfield Public Library, and I have been working with teens for almost 15 years now. I came to, just a little bit about my background, I came to librarianship as my second career. My first, I was actually an attorney. I went back to school to thinking I would work in a law library, took a class in YA literature, and that was it. I was hooked. I love my job. I love working with teens. I'm grateful for Kim giving me the opportunity to come here and talk with you about understanding and connecting with your teen patrons. I structured this and I did a form of this during COVID for my own staff for the staff I work with as a staff training. So this is kind of structured for people who have no experience working with teens all the way up to teen librarians who may be looking for ways to train their staff and everything too. So I feel like hopefully there's a little bit in there for everyone. I have kind of a lot of information. So because I never know, I don't know where everyone is starting at. So we're all kind of starting at our at ground level basically for this. So with that in mind, I'm going to hop to our learning goals. I always like to give a roadmap when I'm dealing with teens or really anyone. I like to give them a roadmap of where we're going so they know. So we're going to be talking about understanding why teens do what they do. With that, we're going to be looking a little bit in the teen brain, briefly reflecting on personal experiences and perceptions and intersection of identity. Then we're going to move on to understanding why we do what we do. And when I say we, I mean why Teen Services does what we do, whether it's programming, activities, advocating, collection development. And I'm going to be touching base on the Search Institute research. I really find that powerful when I'm discussing a justification for teen services, essentially. And lastly, managing teen behavior, my end dropped off there, managing teen behavior, just touching base on establishing rules and consequences, staff education and enforcement. So with that, we're going to jump right into the teen brain. So I'll try and do this quickly, but there's like so much in the teen brain. For my children's librarians, you already know this, by the time we are about the age of 6, our brain is 90 to 95% of the size it's going to be when we are an adult. So from 5 to 12, some of this activity kind of plateaus, and then we hit puberty and boom, there's all this extensive remodeling going on in our brain, and there's this sculpting and there's synaptic pruning, which sounds very scary, and there's other connections that are getting strengthened. And those connections and that development happens from the back of the brain going forward. Why it's significant for us as people who work with teens, because we all work with teens in some capacity, whether you're on CERC or you are the teen librarian, is that prefrontal cortex, which you see right here, is where all the rational decisions are made. And that's the last one that these connections are strengthened and the synaptic pruning happens. So that's the place where we learn to think about consequences. We learn the ability to plan, solve problems, and control impulses. So we've all heard jokes about frontal lobe being not fully developed, and there is basis for that, essentially. So if teens aren't using this prefrontal cortex to make their relying for decision making and problem solving, really kind of what are they? And they're down here with this amygdala. And this is where it's associated with our emotions, our impulses, aggression, instinctive behavior, really. So when you hear, when people complain about teens being the drama, it is no wonder. This is not an area known for rational and logical thinking. On the flip side, it's not necessarily a negative, and they say think that there are evolutionary reasons why teens are so emotional. Emotions help us to connect with people, and it actually is a really powerful learning tool. If you think about when you have a positive emotion with an experience, you're more likely to remember it. Negative, it deters, it makes you clear away from that event in the future. So that is actually good. So this emotional center is developing faster. One other thing that we want to keep understand is this emotional center is developing faster and being used without this strong cognitive center to assist with interpretation. So something that we'll see, and if you're a parent of a teen, you've definitely seen this, is with respect to conversation. So when you're an adult and you are having conversation with someone, you're really taking in the verbal and the nonverbal cues to put together that entire message. With teens, because they don't have that necessarily strong cognitive connection, they may be misconstruing expressions. So concern could come off as looking like anger or disappointment. And I think I know I have definitely had those conversations where I'm trying to look concerned. It comes across maybe as being really disappointed in someone. So you can see where that leads to difficulties with conversation. Another thing to take into consideration, I was talking about the synaptic pruning. Like I say, it sounds scary. And for teen services, why I really think this is another justification for why it's so important is that pruning, those connections that aren't being used, are being broken down. So this is really an important time for us to stimulate those connections. Teens should be doing things like playing instruments, writing, learning new languages, puzzles, sports, all those activities. So many of the activities that we do and provide at the library are things that increase brain plasticity and increase the likelihood of keeping those connections, which we want. And then the last kind of thing to look at is just this reward center. Compared to adults, teens need kind of extreme rewards, and we know that, to achieve the same brain activity. Autonomy, social relationships, those become driving forces. So doing things like saving face, which we know, and sense of autonomy are all big motivators for them. And it's just like before, it's not necessarily a negative thing that they are driven by rewards as opposed to consequences, like so many of us adults, because it makes them better learners compared to adults. Actually, like they found that teens are better learners, and I think we all know that deep down. They're risk takers, which is good in so many ways because so many of them are not afraid to fail. And so they will take these risks and they will learn new things that, as adults, maybe we're not as comfortable with. So that is the brain. I'm not going to go into all the chemistry and hormones. It just feel like it bears touching upon to say, we also know all of these hormones are going on. The brain, teen brain, is being bathed in adrenal stress hormones, sex hormones, growth hormones. All of that influences brain development. Production of testosterone is 10 times higher for boys. I thought it was interesting. Dopamine activity increases. That impacts risk taking, and it also increases a vulnerability to boredom. So there is a scientific reason why teens are bored more easily, and I'm sure there are lots of evolutionary ramifications to why that could be and what that drives them, connects with that risk taking. Interestingly, two more hormones that connect to our sleep. I just wanted to point this out because this is like a further grumpy making twist. Cortisol wakes us up. We know melatonin puts us to sleep. So for adults, our melatonin kicks in roughly around 10, gets us nice and sleepy. We're down for the night, wake up early for work, and it all goes well. We get our sleep. For teens, they find that usually it's not kicking in until like 1 a.m. So they're not falling asleep till later. they need, as you can see from this chart from the National Sleep Foundation, they need more sleep than we do. And chances are most teens start their day before anyone. They're up catching that bus. I think in Fairfield, like between 7:30 or so, most kids are catching that bus. They're the first ones out the door. They need the most sleep, and they're the last ones to go to sleep. So that's just another factor to consider, sleep deprivation, constant sleep deprivation. So that's enough with the science. And we're just going to move on to a little bit of personal examination. I'm not going to ask people to type in anything about your own personal experience or anything. I think it's just worth briefly thinking about, and you can close your eyes if it helps you imagine it, but I think like sometimes when dealing with teens, it can help to tap into your empathy if you think about who your middle school friends were, or if you deal with high school, think about high school friends. If everyone's got that image of your friends, think about how you were with your parents. How'd you treat them? How was school? Were there cliques that you were dealing with? And kind of really what was predominantly on your mind at that time. I hear parents all the time, and I'm willing to bet many of you do, who think that their kid would never be disrespectful to an adult. And those sometimes are the kids who are the most challenging. On the flip side, I have met parents after a program or out and about, and I tell them, like, your kid's great. We love having them. We love having your teen. They add so much, whatever. And they're like shocked. They seem surprised. Am I talking about the same kid? So I think that this kind of shows that every single adolescent kind of goes through this change where we're acting out in one way or another. And it could be against our parents. So those parents think that their kid misbehaves because they treat them that way at home, but they are great out in public. Or the flip side, they could be acting out against friends and schoolmates and bullying, or sadly, we see a lot of acting out against themselves. So if it helps, thinking back on your experience to help you kind of develop empathy can be a powerful tool. But I have like a kind of a caveat to that. I have to caution people with respect to this, because you can't use your experience, and I've heard some people do this. You can't use your experience as a yardstick by which to measure the behavior and experiences of teens now. Even if you are young, fresh out of library school, and you're 6 years or 5 years out of high school, your experience is vastly different than today's teens with respect to technology, social media, socio-political climate. It's all very different. So, I mean, certainly for me, it is very, very different. So I think about my awkwardness, as you can see in the picture, my awkwardness, and that helps me, but not so much expecting like, well, I would never have done that, which brings me to the next slide that I want to talk about when we're saying, why do teens do what they do? I don't think we have to also discuss kind of this intersection of identities. And it's going to seem like I'm kind of getting off track, but I'm going to bring this back. So in law, they have this idea, they call it the eggshell skull rule. So I put it up there. And I feel like it's really applicable to the intersection of identities. So let me get to my example. So if I'm out driving and I am playing with my phone, or I'm concentrating on my GPS, and I tap someone's car, I'm liable for the damage that I did. I was not paying attention. It's my fault. So say it was just a tap. Now, most people don't even have a mark on their car. They walk away. It's not a big deal. But the person I hit has something like brittle bone disease, and they break a collarbone. So I'm liable for that damage. The theory is I take my plaintiff, my victim, the person I hit essentially for as they are. I can't say it wouldn't have hurt most people, it wouldn't have hurt me. 99% of the people would have walked away. It doesn't matter. I'm dealing with this particular person. And when we're looking at teen behavior, really any patron, that's what we must be aware of, that the possibility that this teen has a different experience, be it culturally, physically, socially, racial, sex, gender, or economics. And we are dealing with that intersection of all those identities. So it's not just a teen, it is a teen who has these different identities that they are bringing in to this interaction that we have in the library. So I put 3 identities I wanted to discuss on this slide. It by no means is to say that these are the most important identities, but more just I find that these are ones that right now we are really kind of hot topics in teen services that I felt bared mentioning and touching base on. So we're going to start with BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and or people of color. And I'm just going to talk about 2 things to be aware of with respect to that I think are kind of thoughts that we can tap into. So first off, I want to click on our equity profile. So, and I just saw this come across that they're going to do a whole presentation about this, which I'm excited for. So I clicked to the data haven. I'm going to the town equity reports. I hope it's still following. If it's not, Kim, let me know. I'm going to search and download the report for Fairfield. It has Connecticut's numbers in there, which, let's see, let me go back. Okay. And hopefully you're still following along. There's so much information here. I'm concerned, and what we're going to be concerned with specifically is looking at education, because that is what's really, our teens are coming to us most of the time right after school, or maybe during the summer. But how they are perceiving their interactions in the library is, I think, definitely colored by what they are, what their perceptions, what they are experiencing in the school system. So I think that this lends us a lot of information as to gives us a snapshot and gives us some awareness of this. So as we're looking at this, we can see both Connecticut, so it's useful for everyone, and Fairfield school districts. We'll see the diversity of Connecticut for their students broken down by color and block. You see Fairfield school districts is not nearly as diverse as our state is. They have kind of 3 different categories that they looked at. The SBAC ELA, SBAC is, if you're not familiar, is this, and I had to look this up, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, ELA, English Language Arts Pass Rate. It purports to measure student knowledge of the subject matter, critical thinking, analytical writing, and problem solving skills. We've all heard issues with standardized testing, and when you look at this, it does call into question. I'm not going to analyze the data or anything, but I think that this is something to be aware of when we look at the pass rates. We look at it white, Black, Latino, Asian. Those statistics seem very jarring to me. And when I look at Fairfield, somewhat it's mirroring. I find it disturbing that there aren't statistics for Black or Asian. That makes me question too. What really also stands out to me is the suspension per 1,000 students. And you're looking at the disparate outcomes here with respect to our total white versus Black and Latino and Asian. And that definitely is once again echoed in my individual town. So that's giving me some perspective as to what my teens with identities with this intersection of identities may be bringing into the library, and what issues may be prevalent in their lives too, with this graduation rate too. So I'm going to jump back, and I encourage everyone to take a look at that. There's a lot of information beyond just what I touched on there. So hopefully I'm back on the presentation slide now. Okay. And so the other point I wanted to talk about with respect to BIPOC is just librarians. And I love, like, we suffer from a persistent lack of racial and ethnic diversity that hasn't changed significantly in 15 years. And I think most of us are aware of this. Like, I think it's something between 80 and 83% of librarians in 2020 identified as white. There's a lot of little statistical differences between further identification. I found everywhere from 6.4 to 9.5% of librarians identifying as Black or African American, roughly 7.8 to 9.9 identifying as Hispanic or Latino, and 3.5 to 4 for Asian American, Pacific Islander. So, and librarians were also older than the general workforce at 48. And we are predominantly female. So that also impacts, I mean, I think that many of us are doing our collection audits and things like that, making sure that, and I know Kim has done programs about this and everything, making sure that we are carrying books that represent experiences from everyone who may want to check out a book in our library, that we are doing that. But for many people who are coming to the library, the staff that they are seeing, that they are interacting with, does not necessarily represent, they don't see themselves represented in our staff, and that impacts things. So moving on, LGBTQIA, I thought one thing I wanted to highlight here, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that the CDC does, I think is very valuable. They started it in 2015. Well, they started surveying and including questions specifically related to our LGB students in 2015. So it's every 2 years. So they have some data now, because they've been able to consistently ask these questions. And what they've found every time they ask these questions is that our LGB students have greater odds of violence victimization compared to heterosexual students across all the 7 categories that they look at. So from forced sex, sexual dating violence, physical dating violence, bullying at schools, electronic bullying, feeling unsafe going to the school, being at the school, walking home from the school, threatened or injured with a weapon, all of those LGB students are at greater odds of. And also they've done surveys, and they found that LGB students have greater odds of suicide risk than heterosexual students. And that's once again across all 5 indicators that they look at, from persistent feelings of sadness all the way to suicide attempts. So that should especially inform your sense of advocacy, I feel like, in the library, and being proactive, and once again, collection development and how we're running our programs and everything. So, and the last kind of identity I wanted to talk about is neurodiversity. And this is kind of an umbrella term. I like the term neurodiversity because it refers to the concept that certain developmental disorders are normal variations of the brain. You can't tell someone is neurodiverse by looking at them. And that's why I wanted to highlight this, because some of these behaviors you can't tell just by looking at someone that they may be neurodiverse, and this may account for some behavior. So specifically, I wanted to just reflect on autism. I personally, and I feel like probably a fair number of you, I have a fair number of kids who are on the autism spectrum disorder who come to my programs. Autism is generally characterized by difficulties in communication and social interaction. and also demonstrating some kind of repetitive interests or patterns or behaviors. So this is like, I can tell you all about dinosaurs for 2 hours or things like that. So basically, with autism, the researchers have found that the brain, it just different connections between different areas of the brain in persons with autism are different from what they call typically developing individuals. And they perceive this sensory stimuli different, and it's processed differently. So therefore, the response that they give to sensory stimuli, whether it's something that's messy, things like that, may to some people seem inappropriate or unusual. So ways we see it in the library are things like not making eye contact when you're when you're speaking to someone, and that may be because what's going on here is way too much sensory information for me to take in what's coming out of your mouth. The messy activities, having someone respond to something that's messy or things like that, being slow to respond to instructions or not answering when they call your name. I may be dealing with everything else that's going on in the room, and it's too much for me to respond back to a name. Fidgeting, basically the world can be confusing and seem unpredictable for people with autism. So there's that daily routines, rules, sameness that come to rely on. So sometimes if things are thrown out of whack and they don't encounter what they expect, this can be difficult. And meltdowns occur. And I think we just all need to be aware that behavior has a purpose. If you're seeing a meltdown, it's not naughty. It's basically someone being completely overwhelmed by the sensory stimuli that they're encountering. So why do we do what we do? And I'm talking about programming, advocating, and when I say we, I'm talking about teen services, programming, advocating space, access technology, digital print collections, all of that. It goes beyond the basic idea that teens are members of our community and we should be servicing them. We should be providing them with neutral, safe public spaces, places for them to socialize, experiment with technology, participate in our programs and everything. Teen services is really relatively new. I think, many of you may be like the first teen librarian that your library's had, or maybe the second. Just like teen books written specifically for teens is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. I think overall it's a reflection of societal knowledge and rules. So basically teenagers didn't emerge as like a thing really until the middle of the 20th century, thanks to education, economics, and technology. Like until we had cars where teens could drive to, where we could take teens to like big schools and things like that. And we moved out of the agrarian economy. I mean, all of that means that we finally just learned and started to understand and do research on the teenage years and realize, hey, these are important times. We should be investing in them. And the group that's kind of been in the forefront of doing some of that research is the Search Institute. They've been researching, they get federal funding. They've been doing research about this developmental stage called adolescence or teens since the 1950s. They created in the 1990s this list, this developmental asset list. And this is what I use frequently when I am trying to describe the benefit of teen services, because we still sometimes have to justify why we are what we are and why we do what we do. And so this I find is a useful tool because this tool reaches across all areas. Every agency that deals with teens can use this tool, and many of them do. The developmental asset list that they came up with was created. They've interviewed 6 million young people across the United States and the world. So this is worldwide known. Asset focuses on 40 positive supports and strengths that young people need to succeed. And half the focus is on relationships, and things with their families, schools, and communities. Those are external, and half are internal, which look at social, emotional support, values, and commitments that are nurtured within young people. So I just pulled directly from their form because I love how they lay it out. It's very succinct. You can actually get their form from their website. You do have to sign up for it, but it's all free. I find it very, I highlighted the ones that I feel like good, that I feel like teen services, we can actually help meet. Things like other adult relationships and caring neighborhood, community values, youth, I think is very important. Youth is resources, service to others, neighborhood boundaries, things like this, creative activities, youth programs. You can see as I'm saying these, all of these are things that we deal with in our programming and everything. These are things that we support. For those internal assets, we are still there providing support for things like this. Homework, some of our kids do not have safe, quiet, calm places to do their homework, and that is what we can provide. Some of us provide homework support or tutor.com, things like that. We provide computers, access to materials. Reading for pleasure is really what we're all about. Responsibility through our programs and other things that we offer. There's really a whole host of things that the Teen Services Department can really help develop some of these assets. So, and this is just a briefly, I just want to touch on how teens actually feel as far as, are they getting these assets in their life? And that's what this is showing. And it's kind of scary to me to see 52% of teens feel like they have other adult relationships besides their parents that support them. And what really is a jaw-dropping to me is only 25% of them feel like their community values them. So things like our teen council and those kinds of programs, giving teens a say, really it's important. It shows them that they're valued. If a well-funded teen department that creates spaces that are inviting and everything, it shows value. Reading for pleasure, shockingly low too. And the last thing with respect to the assets I wanted to show is just these top ones are the high risk behaviors. You see the number of assets that these individuals are reporting. You can see that people from 31 to 40 assets, those people who are engaging in high risk behavior, not many of those people who are loaded down with these assets engage in violence, sexual intercourse, problem alcohol use, things like that. It's a really low, whereas you go to 0 to 10, pretty high. So on the flip side, these indicators of thriving on this other side, the more assets they have, the more likely they are to be thriving. So it just shows how valuable these are. And the less likely they are to be really thriving. So it's important. With respect to the Search Institute's kind of broadened from the assets also to developmental relationships. And there's like a really great TEDx talk that Ken Pickell does. I am not going to show that. I have in the past, but it's pretty long. So I tried to do the Cliff Notes version. And they talk about basically developmental relationship being kind of like these tree roots, giving teens the ability to withstand a storm if they have these strong developmental relationships. And they just talk about, he explains a whole interview that you can do with kids, which is really interesting, but we don't have time to get into that. So I did the 5 key actions that they talk about, and these make sense. And I think they're fairly intuitive. And as I go through these, a lot of teen services people, you're going to say like, yes, I do that. And that makes sense. And I'm glad to hear I'm on the right track. So expressing care, showing teens that they matter. We listen, we believe you, we're warm and encouraging, challenging growth. We're doing this when we hold them accountable. We expect the best from them. We expect the good behavior. We expect them, push them with programs, help them learn from mistakes. Providing support, be it helping them navigate some difficult situation or system. Our college programs, things like that are ways that we can provide support, empowering them to build confidence, advocate advocating for them when they need it, and putting limits, setting boundaries, sharing power. This is a big thing. Taking them seriously and treating them fairly, including them in decisions. Once again, I'm back to that teen council. It allows them to collaborate. It helps them solve problems. It gives them the opportunity to lead. And the last one for developing relationships is expanding their possibilities. And this is, we're exposing them to new ideas, new experiences, new places, introducing them to people who can help them grow, inspiring them to see possibilities in their future. So that, we're moving on to that third prong kind of, and putting some of this together to understand how to better manage teen behavior. And when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about the really extreme cases, like if you are having to call the police on a regular basis or someone's being assaulted in the library, that's on a different level. What we're talking about are our day-to-day kind of behavioral expectation issues. So with that in mind, once again, I'm breaking it down to 3. And we are going to talk about establishing what your rules are and the consequences for breaking them. So basically, everyone should consider what's in your toolkit. And I know this is very small on your computer, but I wanted to show you what I found in my toolkit. We redid our code of conduct and our unattended children policy. Basically, the head of children's was new, our director was new, and I was new to being the head of teen services all at the same time. And so we revised all this. So this was kind of, we looked through a lot of what other libraries had done and chose what was going to be good for our toolkit. You can't really see, but I underlined the passages in our code of conduct that I found particularly applicable. And if I show a teen, it's underlined and they can kind of see, because I'm not dealing with, there's a whole list of unacceptable behavior for my teens. They're not like sleeping and loitering and poor hygiene. That's not really an issue. What's primarily the issue is the disruptive behavior, including shouting and fighting. And the unattended children policy is useful because it actually extends beyond age 12 for us. And it includes something to the effect of that you have to apply, or you have to abide by our code of conduct, and you can't require excessive staff attention, which is that catch-all that gets I've had to go back to the stack 17 times to tell you to be quiet. That's excessive staff attention. And staff support we'll talk a little bit about in the future. So know what your rules are. If you don't have, I think most everyone should have some kind of code of conduct. Know what your rules are, and know how so much of this disruptive conduct can be subjective. So know what that actually means, what you're all talking about when you say disruptive. Like we said, meltdown isn't not necessarily a disruptive conduct. So we're going to go to make sure that everyone on your staff is familiar with your rules. And one way we did that is by having like a mass staff training, but it's also just by your daily conversations. I had a particular set of circulation staff who were on the front lines when school let out, and they like needed a little more. And so I made like a little flow chart for them, kind of to help them, if this like disruptive conduct, then this, and that helped them with that. So as teen services, we're kind of support and sources of education for the rest of our staff. And the last and probably biggest prong that is the actual enforcing of the rules. So I have a few helpful tips, hopefully, on enforcing, because sometimes this is the hardest part, to be kind of the bad guy at times. So my number one rule is always to be respectful. I try to set the tone when teens come into the teen room or our after school teen space. I'm always greeting them, or whoever is checking them in is greeting them. We try to learn their names. We try and show interest in what they're doing, but we don't invade their privacy and show, there's a point in time where it's read the room and it's not appropriate. If I ask their name, I give them my name, because otherwise it's rude. It's like I'm a party host and I want everyone to be comfortable. And when you set the tone and you are respectful, it also, and interested in them, it's one way we can help fulfill that developmental asset of being an adult who is providing them support. Being firm and calm, next big tip, unless it is a dangerous activity that really needs to be addressed immediately, I feel like we can always take a deep breath and calm ourselves. So, and we just have to go back to that biology and know, like, they don't have that frontal lobe, and that, you know, we have all that cognitive development going on. We are in charge of ourselves. So we have to remember that teens are not good at necessarily reading emotions. So if we are coming at them angry and frustrated, they can think, you know, they may misread it and think we're disgusted with them. And besides that, if you think of someone approaching you that way, aren't you going to react negatively too? So having that, you're always upping the ante when you come into any situation with your emotions essentially on it. So the crazier it gets, the calmer you have to be. And that's like, I find like that's my forte. Like, once things really start to get crazy, then I can relax. I am a very anxious person until things get like, till there's craziness around me. And then like, I take my breath and I can calm down. It's like, that's what I've been preparing for with all my anxiety. So next, let me go back here. Next, what we want to do is be consistent. And this goes back to our staff training, really. No one wants to be the bad guy, but you're not the bad guy if you are setting limits and you're all applying those same limits, because as we discussed before, teens need rules, they need guidelines, and they need to be held accountable. And that's not bad. But it needs to be consistent, and everyone needs to be applying the same rules. So that's where you're reaching out to your staff, and you all, you know, whether it is like, hey, on the mezzanine level, that's only for quiet study. And, you know, whatever your library rules are, everyone should be enforcing them in the same way. Teens should know when they come through the doors what to expect, and not know that so-and-so is sitting on the desk and I'm going to get yelled at more for this than someone, you know, the other person. So we got to be consistent. No favorites, because teens are very sensitive to the appearance of fairness, particularly when they feel like it goes against their interests. So this doesn't mean that there aren't going to be certain teens that will gravitate towards you. Like I said, that's really good, because you can be that adult that's a supportive adult in their life. Fairness comes into play when it is misbehavior. For instance, if it is a group of kids and there's a lot of misbehavior going on and I have to ask them to leave, I'm not really going to single out like 2 of you of the 4 of you need to leave and the other 2 can stay, unless it's really obvious. Because chances are the next time, if they're regulars and they have bad behavior, the kids who felt they were unjustly sent out will help you enforce the rules, basically. I do have one exception to that. If one person's behavior really stands out, I'll try to speak to them separately, and particularly if they're in a position of leadership within the group, because they would want to save face, and it's just much more effective to speak with them separately. And I guess the exception to the exception is also if I do hear someone who's saying something that me reprimanding in front of the entire, if it will benefit the entire group to hear what I have to say, if they're saying anything that's homophobic, racist, sexist, it's going to get them called out in front of the entire group, because it's our duty to set an example of what's acceptable and create a safe space for everyone who's there. And I had this little side story. I was watching TikTok, and I follow this this preschool teacher who is gay, and some of you might follow me. He's great, and he was telling a story about when he was in high school. And well, first he went on to talk to high school teachers, and he was telling them that, hey, some of your LGBTQ students may not really feel like they have a lot of school spirit, and because of what we had just talked about with that CDC survey, that they don't feel safe, that they, don't feel welcome at their school. And he reflected back when he was a teen, and he was elected, or he was in the running for his homecoming court. And at the football game where they were bringing down people for the homecoming court, someone came and presented him as a joke with like a tiara or something. And he was saying how not a single adult or teacher in that football stadium said anything to that kid or stopped him. And it's unacceptable. And I think that creating a safe environment, physically or mentally, is really important for us. So many teens aren't going to come out and say that someone's making them feel uncomfortable. When I've had to ask people to leave, more often than not, I'll have someone come up to me afterwards and say, thank you for having that person leave. I didn't feel, that was upsetting them. But while the person was in there, you would have thought they were the life of the party. So it does matter. The next thing, my next tip, oops, I went on too quick there, is give choices. And this is like a two-pronged thing. First of all, and I think a lot of us do this, we give choices with respect to activities in our teen space. We have computers, maybe doing homework help, having board games, hanging out with friends. If you have a particular teen space where you can do activities daily, most of us tend to rotate out those activities. So one day I'm doing gaming with them, another day I'm doing an arts and crafts, something like that, so that every day someone's getting some kind of validation that their interests are important, they matter, we care, we are showing them their value. Also, more activities, more likely to be engaged, less issues with behavior, and asking them what they want to do further engages them in the process, and you ask them and then they tell you, and then you can have those on hand too. Second way to give choices is with respect to behavioral, correcting behavior. So if I'm a group of students are studying and they're really loud and they're on our second floor at our library or something where it's a quiet zone, I may tell them, you need to be quiet or go to our teen space, because you can be pretty loud in our teen space. If I have to come up again, I may tell them, now you need to come to our teen space, or maybe today's not your day at the library, something like that. So I'm giving them options, telling them what the consequences are. They can make that choice. They're autonomous. And then I have to follow through on whatever I've said. Don't argue. I feel like it's obvious, but I do putting things to not say are the because I said so, the parent favorite, because I said so. What's your problem? Generalizations, you never or you always, because they're always, you never and you always invite debate, because no one ever and no one always. And if the behavior is egregious enough that you have to ask them to leave, you have to be able to tell them that they violated the code of conduct and it's time to leave. I usually tell them, you are welcome to come back tomorrow, but today is not your day. They're going to stall. I stand there and I wait. And suddenly they may become the best behaving patron in the world, and think that you'll let them stay. But once you've made that decision, once you have told them that, and you have a calm mind, as we said, you made your decision with that calm mind, you can fully articulate what code of conduct they violated, why they need to leave for that day, then you have to follow up with that. So we're not arguing, but we are listening. And I threw in LEAP. If you Google LEAP, you'll come up with all sorts of explanations of this. It's just it's like a process of, it stands for listen, empathize, ask questions, and paraphrase. And then some people add the S for leaps and say summarize too. So it's just a little thing to keep in the back of your mind about, we always have issues with took someone's backpack and then there's a chaos and they hide it in the bathroom and there's chases happened, or people's shoes disappear all the time. So it's, let me see, it seems to be bothering you. Let me understand. She's taking your backpack and hiding it, and, you know, going from there and kind of, oops, let me go back. What this is doing is basically validating them. It's opening the roads for communication. It's making them feel heard and respected and more likely to comply with your rules later. My last tip, and this one sometimes can be really hard, but I really tell people not to take things personal that come out of teens' mouths. It doesn't mean that we're doormats for the teens, but I think this ties in with the first point of being respectful. I try to model respect, and you can still be respectful even when you're being disrespected. And how that kind of plays out, I'll give you like an example of what's happened, and I'm going to make up a name for this person. But I had Mark, I'm going to call him. He always loved attention. He would seek it out. He'd say really outlandish things. He'd get into everyone's business. So I had to talk to him basically every day. He was in our teen space though, so we did allow more volume and everything for that. But every day he came in, I always greeted him. I always smiled. I always talked to him. How's your day been and everything. And one day when it was really bad, I had to kick him out. He was resisting. He's stalling. We walk upstairs because our space is in the basement. We walk upstairs and he starts to get disrespectful with me. And I just told him, you know, I'm always respectful with you. And it kind of just stopped. Then I called him on it. It stopped. And he, like, that bad boy attitude kind of just dropped, and he looked really kind of sad. And it kind of broke my heart, but I had to follow through and make sure he left for that day. And then when I went back down to the basement, I'd say at least 2 or 3 of his friends came up and apologized on his behalf for disrespecting me. So they don't lose. They know who treats them with respect, even if they have to be reminded, and they do, you know, will respect you in turn. When I say don't take things personally, also, honestly, I'm just more concerned that they are following, most concerned with what's coming out of their mouth when I'm asking them to leave than that they are actually leaving. They're trying to save face. It's not appropriate and it's not productive for me to get into a match of words with them. And I think of like the guy from Breakfast Club, if anyone saw that movie, when Judd Nelson and the principal are butting heads and they're up in the ante, and now you're out for 2 weeks and everything. And you never want to have that almost bidding war with your punishments. It's never going to work out. The best thing to do is make sure they're complying, their feet are heading out the door. And then if they're a regular the next day when they come back, quieter heads have prevailed and you can talk to them in private. So those are my tips for enforcing the rules. And we have about 5 minutes left, I guess, if there are any questions. Kim, did anything come through?
We were there was just a little bit of chatter. I shared some information. Someone asked, and I might have missed this because I was in the middle of typing something, what SBAC stands for?
SBAC, it's the, let me go back and make sure I give the, it is the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, and the ELA is the English Language Arts. So in Connecticut, they give these tests, these standardized tests, and it's supposed to measure their knowledge of the subject matter, their critical thinking, analytical writing, and problem solving skills, supposedly.
Right. Okay. Oh, we got some folks saying this was helpful. I also made it so that folks can unmute themselves now that, you know, we don't have to worry about lawnmowers and dogs barking and things like that. So if someone had a question that's maybe a little easier to say verbally, then it would be to type. Feel free to maybe use the raise hand feature, and then we can have you unmute yourself. But this was really helpful. I can definitely say I remember a lot of this from my time in front of the teens. Arguing gets you 100% of nowhere. 100% of nowhere. Yeah. So we'll just keep an eye on the chat for a little bit. I also put in, most of y'all know the deal, the survey that we always send out. That's, and I'm dropping it in again. That is really helpful for us so that we can make sure that the programs and workshops that we're bringing in are helpful to you. You know, maybe there's something that we didn't touch on today, you know, that you would like to hear more about. We can bring Jen back for part 2, right? If there's, you know, something that you'd like to dive deeper into, don't hesitate to ask any questions. And sorry, I didn't remember to turn the transcription on until about halfway through. I need to post it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.